Hey friends, and welcome to episode 8. So today I'm going to talk about the uncomfortable topic of death. I'm actually very comfortable with this topic, but our society as a whole, not so much, um, which is why I labeled it as uncomfortable for most people. So this is partly inspired because every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, a friend and I, Tom, co-host a question and answer live session in virtual reality on the topic of death. It's called the Death Q&A, and it's really just a place. He says this often that we don't really have all the answers, but we just want to promote the conversations and to talk about to have an open, safe space for people to talk about what do they believe? What are their ideas on death? What emotions come up with the reality of death, especially when we lose friends, family, pets? We experience forms of death in ways that can can be heavy for us. And growing up, I was always a bit intrigued, but there was also this like underlying fear behind even talking about death. Like, if I talked about it, maybe I would accidentally some superstitious, oh, I'm gonna call upon it or something. So there's a lot of fear even in talking about it, not just with me, but other people too. So like even if I did try to bring it up, it usually ended up being a very short conversation, and the subject would quickly change, because underlying there's a lot of discomfort with the reality of death. And so here I am bringing it to you, and again, just to kind of invite you to sit with it a little bit more. It's actually a really important part of increasing the quality of our life and for spiritual awakening, if you're into deepening your own spiritual practice. Because denying the reality of death, uh, it's just not a healthy thing. And there's so many different um, side effects, negative side effects to denying the reality of death. So, and this isn't so much about the word isn't coming to me, but this isn't about like making death into some super exciting thing or anything. It's just more about bringing it into reality, of recognizing that this is part of our reality. Death is all around us. And, it's running away from something that is inevitable, is inevitably creating all kinds of suffering in us. In fact, um, Eckhart mentions that the root of all fear can be derived and sourced back to the fear of death. And the deep innate desire for self-preservation. And this goes not only to our physical bodies and surviving, but also our mental sense of self, our ideas, our beliefs, our opinions. When we are really attached to an opinion, for example, and somebody else comes out of left field with a challenging opposition of an opinion, if we are really attached to ours, their challenging opinion is going to create this sort of survival mode reactivity, because their opposition is threatening our very sense of self, which is identified in a certain belief. This could be religious belief, this could be a political belief, this could be even something smaller. And so anytime we invite a new perspective or a change of opinion or belief, in a way, it's like a little death that's occurring, because some older part of us, some part of us that we were attached to, has to dissolve in order to continue to grow and to learn. Which is where I believe actually a lot of the fear of change, which I did my first video on, episode 1, it roots back to the fear of death. Um, and spiritually speaking, I've always found it really interesting when um, we say we believe in the divine, we believe in God or something bigger, something powerful, and yet we have this innate fear of death. Those to me are a juxtaposition. They don't. If there's any sense of fear of dying, then it means there's a little bit of disbelief. Maybe you have all the right ideas in your mind, but if there's, when something threatening happens, or perceived threat happens, when all this fear comes up, that means that there's some part of us uh, that doesn't actually quite believe everything will be okay when we die. And it's important to be honest about that rather than deny that. The truth will set us free. So if there is, even in my talking right now, I'm bringing up this topic, if there's discomfort that's coming up in you, acknowledge it right now. Be with it. You're not wrong. Not to make, I don't necessarily like the idea of just because something is normal, it's okay. Because I think normal in reality is pretty insane in our world. However, it is normal to be afraid of death, especially earlier on in our spiritual practices. And the only way to move beyond that, to find the real feeling of safety and okayness with it, and to truly not fear it, is to go into the fear itself, to be confident and strong enough. This, like it is with all negative emotions, we have to go through them. We can't deny them. We can't pretend like they're not there. We have to look at them and be with them, and then bring in philosophies and perspectives and perhaps different teachers that can help us understand and come to a genuine feeling of understanding versus conceptual. The conceptual understanding can only get you so far, and that's why it never works in the end. You have to have the genuine feeling. So, powerful topic. I could talk on and on about the concept of death because there's so many different ways that it can come into our lives. Just like the death of an opinion or a death of a belief structure. There's also, there's all kinds of little deaths. Like right now with the virus thing, not only is the reality of death more in our face, we suddenly feel much more vulnerable to it, but also it's, there's little deaths occurring to our routines, right? Our normal way of life is suddenly changing in a lot of ways. So even that little bit of change is a form of death. And so it's like we're constantly surrounded by it. And a lot of people, even when they hear the word, they think of like heaviness, depression, sadness, and that's due to like these deep fundamental beliefs of what death is, and to fear death. Because our culture very much fears death. We kind of recognize death as being like the worst possible thing that could happen. Um, Even in spiritual traditions, they still believe death is not a good thing. And by no means am I saying should it be celebrated. Like it shouldn't be rushed. I don't believe in homicide or suicide in that sense. Um, but it should be respected in a way of where not only do we respect it in the sense that we don't pretend like we're indestructible, right? So you follow certain rules, you play by, you don't take too much risk if you can, you discern the amount of risk that's worth taking, that kind of thing, to honor. I don't know what it is about 8 minutes when my dogs start to bark. but you honor that it is always possible, and then focus on recognizing that possibility, but without living in fear, living from the freedom of the fear and deep acceptance of its reality. And then you have a true freedom to just be yourself, and it dramatically increases the quality of your life, because when you can recognize the impermanence of everything, it's almost like suddenly everything becomes that much more beautiful, that much more magnificent, and like HD quality is how I kind of put it. When I first really honestly sat with the reality that everything around me, including myself, my friends and family, the things I love most, is all impermanent. At first there was fear, but once I went through the fear, then there was this whole another level of appreciation that came in. So it's a really powerful thing to sit with. And here was the death of this little little 10-minute video. Much love.